Hello, thank you for listening. This is the near death experience of Rene Hope. Open quote. Here is my life's most important experience. First, the events leading up to it, my parents' report of occurrences while I was away, my NDE, and finally how I feel about it. Scene 240282, Sydney, Australia, 6 p.m. I left my optical instrument repair firm to go home to Raymond Terrace, a town north of Newcastle, NSW. My partner, Mike, was in the passenger seat. I was driving, and a friend and a part time employee, Steve, was in the back. Raining after 3 months dry, I was driving along the industrial highway and slowing to stop at lights where exit roads from BHP crosses highway. There memory ends. Reported by Mike, my ex-partner. As we approached the lights, they changed to green. As we went into the crossing, the car aquaplaned, speed 43 kilometers. We hit the large industrial power pole just after the intersection. Steve, who was laying on the mattress in the back of the panel van, became a missile. He was thrown forward into the back of Renee's head, driving her into the steering wheel. Medical information. Steve's spine was broken L4. He is a paraplegic. I suffered fractures, basal area, frontal lobe, right eye socket, right zygoma, all depressed, 6 holes in dura. The steering wheel had broken, and spokes of the steering wheel and indicator pierced the body in 3 places, through my throat up into the roof of the mouth, and piercing my right upper and lower thorax. Mike suffered a small seatbelt bruise. My mother reported that in the afternoon of 250282, they were in the office of a professor of neurosurgery where the professor was reporting my death and that they should be grateful, as I would have been a vegetable had I survived. During this conversation, a young, frightened nurse came rushing into the office, blurting out, "She is alive!" She sat up and spoke. The professor chastised her for interrupting them 3 times before taking her outside and lecturing her about dead bodies moving and making noises. The nurse was emphatic. She sat up and said, "Don't give me any more drugs." At this point, my mother took the professor by one elbow, my father by the other, and marched them down the corridor to see. They found me in a back corridor where I had apparently been placed so the nurse could remove equipment prior to my transfer to the morgue. I was in deep coma and breathing. I remained in coma for a further 10 days. My NDE. I don't know when in the above events my experience took place. I have no memory of the process of dying or leaving my body. I was moving my head first through a dark maelstrom of what looked like black boiling clouds, feeling that I was being beckoned to the sides, which frightened me. Ahead was a tiny dot of bright light, which steadily grew and brightened as I grew nearer. I became aware that I must be dead and was concerned for Mom and Dad and my sister and somewhat upset with myself as I thought, they will soon get over it. Like it was in passing, just a fleeting thought as I rushed greedily forward towards this light. I arrived in an explosion of glorious light into a room with insubstantial walls, standing before a man about in his 30s and about 6 foot tall, reddish brown, shoulder-length hair, and an incredibly neat, short beard and mustache. He wore a simple white robe. Light seemed to emanate from him, capital H, and I felt he, capital H, had great age and wisdom. He welcomed me with great love, tranquility, peace indescribable. No words. I felt, I can sit at your feet forever and be content, which struck me as a strange thing to think, say, feel. I became fascinated by the fabric of his, capital H, robe, trying to figure out how light can be woven. He stood beside me and directed me to look to my left, where I was replaying my life's less complimentary moments. I relived those moments and felt not only what I had done, but also the hurt I had caused. Some of the things I would have never imagined could have caused pain. I was surprised that some things I may have worried about, like shoplifting a chocolate as a child, were not there, whilst casual remarks which caused hurt unknown to me at the time were counted. When I became burdened with guilt, I was directed to other events which gave joy to others. Though I felt unworthy, it seemed the balance was in my favor. I received great love. I was led further into the room, which became a hall, and there, coming towards me, was my grandfather. He looked younger than I remembered, and was without his hair lip or cleft palate, but was undoubtedly my grandfather. We hugged, he spoke to me and welcomed me. I was moved to forgive him for dying, and I was 14 and making me break my promise to become a doctor and find a cure for his heart condition. Until that moment, I had not realized I had been angry at him. Granddad told me that Grandma was coming soon, and he was looking forward to her arrival. I inquired why she was coming soon, as she had been traveling from her home in Manchester to New Zealand to Miami for continual summer for a number of years. Granddad told me she had cancer of the bowel and was coming soon. Granddad seemed to have no grasp of time when I pressed for how soon. Open parens, Grandma was diagnosed 3 months later and died in August. I had upset my mother by telling her about it when I regained consciousness. Close parens. After Granddad and I had talked a while, he took me further into the room, which became a hall again, and we approached a group of people whom I started to recognize. The person who first welcomed me came and placed his hand on my shoulder and turned me towards him, capital H. He said, "You must return. You have a task to perform." I wanted to argue. I wanted to stay. I glanced back at Granddad and was propelled quickly towards the entrance, at the threshold, where all became blackness, nothing, no awareness. After, I awoke from my coma slowly over several days, remembering half-dream memories of familiar voices and glimpses of faces. The clearest moments were several occasions where I would awake from deep sleep to find a nurse with a syringe, and I refused any drugs. I have no idea why. I had 3 lots of surgery to repair my face, skull, eye socket. Left hospital with pain, double vision, insomnia, and damage to the 8th cranial nerve, which left me with nausea and disturbed balance. I was for 2 years angry at God for sending me back in such torment, with a task to do, without clues or instructions, only one thing, a clear message I have no idea how to pass on, which is, it is time to live according to your beliefs, capital B, whatever they may be, to put your house, capital H, in order, for the end times are upon us, capital E, capital T, end times are upon us, exclamation mark, close quote. Let me read that again. It is time to live according to your beliefs, whatever they may be, to put your house in order, for the end times are upon us. Open quote. This can't be my task. There was no booming voice, or any way I know the message got there. I am also unsure of the identity of the gatekeeper. No name tag, no introduction. It took me 5 years as a zombie before I was able to rehabilitate myself. I have gainful employment, formed the Head Injury Society New Zealand in 1987, and am paraded as an example of how well it is possible to recover from acquired brain damage. I still don't know my task, still have pain, insomnia, diplopia. That's about it, except to say that the memory of the NDE is more real than what I did yesterday. Close quote. At the end of the NDE experience that Rene wrote, there's a website address. So you go to the website and it is waiting.com /Rene.html, which looks like it gives some more story, more to her story. And so we'll go ahead and read that. Some of it may be a little bit duplicated. Open quote. In my coma, in addition to or after my NDE, I remember brief dreamlike glimpses of people who visited, like my mom and dad. I remember the horror these people expressed when they were first faced with my mangled head and body. Much more clearly, I remember conversations people had around me, like the doctor telling my parents that they should pray for pneumonia because if I survived, I would be a vegetable, and nurses saying that it would soon be over now. I had meningitis and conversations about stopping life support. Throughout all this, I wanted to shout at them that I was okay in there, and for them to get me out from wherever I was trapped. Horrid. In January 1947, a girl child was born named Rene Hope by her parents. Rene Hope grew to an able, bright child who used to spar intellectually with her father. When she left university, she had a PhD in biblical literature history and a BSc in mechanical optical engineering. Rene Hope went to Australia to live and work in 1969. She established an optical instrument repair business, purchased 25 acres of Australian forest, cut trees from that property to build a pyramid-shaped house 3 stories high with a glass north face, surrounded by forests filled with birds, koala, wallaroos, echidna. She had shared her life with her partner Miles for 3 years. Rene was happy and successful, chair of the Raymond Terrace Chamber of Commerce. That was before her brain injury. Rene tells her own story. I was in a panel van, leaving my optical instrument repair firm to go home to Raymond Terrace. My partner Miles was in the passenger seat. I was driving and a friend and part-time employee Stuart was in the back. It was raining after a 3-month-long dry spell. I was driving along the industrial highway and slowing to stop at lights where exit roads from the BHP crosses the highway. There my memory ends. According to her partner Miles, as they approached the intersection, the light changed to green. The van entered the intersection, turning, and then began to aquaplane, even though the vehicle's speed was only 43 kilometers. The vehicle hit the large industrial power pole just beyond the intersection. Stewart, who had been laying on the mattress in the back of the panel van, became a missile. He was thrown forward into the back of Renee's head, driving her forward into the steering wheel. Miles suffered a small seatbelt bruise. Stewart's spine was broken, L4. He is a paraplegic. What happened to Renee? This is the medical information. She suffered many fractures. The basal area, frontal lobe, right eye socket, and right zygoma, the area where the cheek bones joined the skull, were all depressed. There were 6 holes in the dura mater, the protective outer membrane between the brain and the skull. The steering wheel had broken, and spokes of steering wheel and indicator pierced the body in 3 places. through her throat up into the roof of her mouth and piercing her right upper and lower thorax. Rene continues. My mother reported that in the afternoon, 25:02:82, they were in the office of Professor Bucahill, professor of neurosurgery, where the professor was reporting my death. He had told them that they should be grateful, as I would have been a vegetable had I survived. During this conversation, a young frightened nurse came rushing into the office, blurting out, "She's alive!" She sat up and spoke. The professor chastised her for interrupting him 3 times before taking her outside and lecturing her about dead bodies moving and making noises. The nurse was emphatic. She sat up and said, "Don't give me any more drugs." At this point, my mother took the professor by one elbow and my father by his arm and marched him down the corridor to see. They found me in the back of the corridor, where I had apparently been placed so the nurse could remove equipment prior to my transfer to the morgue. I was in deep coma and breathing. I remained in coma for a further 11 days. Others were unaware of my near-death experience. As I lay in coma, I met my grandfather, and that experience has profoundly affected my life. Since then, my faith has been much stronger, yet at the same time I am confused. The gatekeeper sent me back, presumably with some purpose, a task to perform. Yet I came away without any clues or instructions about how to proceed. It's been suggested that this is exactly what happens when brain-injured people are discharged from the hospital. They are discharged without a plan for the future. My hospital discharge from heaven was like that. I still don't know what I'm supposed to do here. You've got to laugh. Some of life has a funny side. The first coma lasted 11 days, or 12. I was awake, sort of, for 3 days and then lapsed into a second coma. The prognosis at the second coma was I would not survive 24 hours. That coma lasted a further 10 days. I got meningitis from holes in the dura. Repairs were made to face, skull, dura, and eye socket after second coma. This was badly done, and I've been left with Neanderthal eyebrows and lines on my forehead. My stay in the hospital was only 3 months. Once I could walk again, they considered their work done. I was discharged with no discharge plan, no information about how to rehabilitate myself, no information to help my partner Miles cope with the changes in his life. I had balance problems, I suffered from double vision, and I needed lots of rest. No effort was made to help me plan for and cope with these problems. Miles didn't understand at all. I tried to go back to the business, but I couldn't cope with living, let alone working. Working for 20 minutes required 2 hours sleep on the floor. I worked at this all week and caught a bus home 52 miles on the weekend. Desperate to recover my business after so long away. It took me ages to discover that double vision is contra-inducive to success as an optical instrument technician. May have helped had I been told. Miles didn't really like Australia. My accident made him have to accept responsibility for me. He was offered no assistance. Our lives were totally changed. He wasn't prepared for such a massive reversal of roles. I was now disfigured, not really able to care for myself, and no longer the nightclub rager. It wasn't long before I was on my own. Miles returned to Hamilton, New Zealand to help his dad through a divorce from his stepmother. During our separation, I began a speedy downhill slide that ended in psychiatric admittance in the shorthand clinic. Miles missed me and sent letters and tapes. He may be the person who told my mother where to find me. To fill my time, I would go, quote-unquote, shopping. I was found in the street several times, blankly staring into space. Rene was not there, just the zombie. I was like that for much of the next 5 years. I spent long time seeing and hearing, but being disconnected, nothing really getting it. Lost for hours. For those first 2 years, I spent a lot of time cursing God for forcing me to, quote unquote, come back. Some nuns I met suggested that I have myself, quote unquote, committed to the shorthand clinic. This news so disturbed my mother that she came to Australia, collected me, and took me back to Auckland, New Zealand. That was in December 1982. I suppose Mum felt I needed to be cared for. She was right. I had been in the pit. These things I had suffered should not have occurred, need not have occurred. They were the result of a care system that was never provided rather than one that didn't work. Mom provided care, total cotton wool. I needed that for a short time. I needed to be secure again. Dad didn't cope well with the accident, nor with the fact his pride and joy had now returned home at age 35, a child again. He had we had always crossed intellectual swords, but after my brain injury, I was too withdrawn, and Dad was too disappointed for the relationship to flourish. I felt he avoided me. It was hard for Mum and Dad. They fell into the error of doing everything for me, so that I ended up with willing slaves who allowed me to opt out of life. The effort involved in struggling to make my battered brain function was essential for my development. You must force the brain to find another way to route the tasks that need to be done. There is no other way. I realized that I must become independent. It was painful to my mother to watch me, but the only way forward for me was to learn by repetition and effort to do things for myself. The first time I made coffee without any help, it took 4 hours. I was unable to string together jug to cupboard to mug, etc., without getting lost and forgetting what I was attempting moment to moment. There has never been any organized help with my rehabilitation. The drive to do that comes from within myself and perhaps from God. The near-death experience has greatly influenced my faith and given me courage when what I really wanted to do was die. The only effective rehabilitation I know of is task repetition, repetition that forces the brain to create new pathways to old knowledge or to develop areas of new skills and knowledge. After 2 years, I had made some small improvements in personal ability, like being able to make coffee or a sandwich, as long as I didn't mind the process taking several hours. Mum found it so hard to see me struggle, she would make me sit down and do it for me. I left my mother's house in Auckland at Miles' invitation to take up life with Miles again in Hamilton. With Miles, I wasn't so protected. I had to do more for myself. I was still very vacant and withdrawn, but allowed to struggle all day to do simple things. The turning point came when I was watching Fred Flintstone on television. It annoyed me that I was unable to follow the story of this simple cartoon. I got angry with myself. I had those university degrees, yet couldn't keep up with a children's cartoon. I threw all of my tablets for pain, for balance, for depression down the toilet. I was going to try a new way. The next day I bought a computer, an Acorn Electron, and some educational programs for teenagers. I sat at that computer every day for hours, stringing together thoughts and actions to master the simple programs. I bought a diary program and used it to organize my life, reminding me of everything I had to do each moment. That computer and subsequent computers have become my subsidiary brain. I still carry a Psion 3A pocketbook. Miles was there throughout my recovery. He contributed by not being my slave, just my friend and lover. Our relationship started to dissolve. I've lost my libido. Miles put up with a partner who had, wait until I finish this chapter. I could no longer stand noisy, crowded places. I would become confused and need to go home. I could no longer dance as my balance centers are shot, and I hadn't learned then the compensations I now have. For several years, he went out while I preferred to stay home. Miles became more and more distant and no longer initiated any close contact. It's surprising our relationship lasted so long. Miles left for greener pastures in November 95. We had been together for 18 years. Not bad, I think, considering all the problems we had. I miss his friendship and company. I still don't know my task, still have pain, insomnia, diplopia, etc. I still pray for release from this struggle, this life that life is, that my task should be completed soon, that I may return home. I now have gainful employment in the newborn intensive care unit of Waikato Hospital. There, I look after life support equipment. I have 3 inventions to my name, modifications to ventilators and incubators to improve the outcome for babies. That's me, the mad scientist at heart. I'm not sure where the human side got lost, if it was ever there. I build the prototypes for the new units at home. The hospital saved $43,000 a year because of my inventions and modifications. I get no royalties. They own all rights. This work of saving babies has become very important to me. In 1983, while still very much in mother's care, I went to Hamilton to visit Miles. I saw an advertisement in the paper about a public meeting for head injury families at the Red Cross Hall. That meeting had been organized by a social worker at Waikato Hospital, Howard Ennis. I attended the meeting with Miles. From Auckland were Dorothy Cromwell and Philip Wrightson, and they showed us a video and told us about a head injury support group in Auckland. At that time, there was pressure in many parts of New Zealand for the creation of support groups for the head injured. I pressed for the formation of the Waikato support group. Howard Ennis allowed me to push him into action, but he left it to me after helping set it up. The Head Injury Society New Zealand was my dream. The society was to ensure that all head injured people would get the support and rehabilitation that I didn't get. I was determined that no other person should have to go through all this shit I had to put up with. Sadly, it's still happening. In 1986, Waikato hosted the first national conference of head injury support groups. In 1987, we held the first 3-day conference where I bullied them into forming the Head Injury Society of New Zealand. Since then, we have employed lots of field workers, and we have worked productively with the Accident Compensation Corporation, but we still have to fight for services that should be provided without the battle. Unfortunately, we alienated Auckland, and the bickering with them is a continuing one. I am now paraded as an example of successful recovery from acquired brain damage, yet the services people like me need are still offered with reluctance. Personally, I'm angered at the inconsistent and short-sighted development of policy and care. It's not too difficult to prove that improved care is cost-effective. Inadequate care renders more than one person dysfunctional. It wrecks and destroys whole families. I can never lose hope, hope being my middle name, but it is still hard work and only possible if you don't give up the vision and keep pushing a little. Progress is always slower than you want it to be. Shalom,